Many know the RMS Titanic as the great unsinkable ship struck by tragedy on its voyage across the ocean in the year 1912. But few know the controversy that exists today, beginning the moment the wreck site was discovered in 1985. The debate over the rightful ownership of the Titanic has led to many successes, failures, and consequences in marine technology, maritime law, and for all the parties involved. April 10, 1912 was an exciting day in Southampton, England. Crowds of people gathered to see the extravagant Royal Mail steamship Titanic set sail for New York City. She was luxurious and the largest ship of her time, being 882.5 feet long. Other ships could not compare. She was built to be the best by the White Star Line in competition with the Cunard Line, and her safety innovations caused her to be deemed unsinkable by many. The voyage was to be historic. The Titanic collided with an iceberg in the mid-Atlantic Ocean on April 14, 1912, and began to slowly fill with water. The water pressure caused her hull to split in two, as she remains today, deep in the ocean. Hundreds of lives and belongings sunk with her, lost, seemingly forever. Expeditions set out almost immediately after the sinking. People wanted to find the bodies, jewels, and gems and other riches that went down with her, but unfortunately, Titanic sank in the midst of nowhere, making her difficult to find. Technology required to find an object so deep in the ocean and so far off from any coast was not invented until the mid-20th century. Eventually, in the summer of 1985, a marine biologist named Robert D. Ballard successfully located the Titanic on an expedition co-headed by Ifremer, a French corporation. They found her some 2 miles deep in the ocean floor using deep-sea camera Argos. The dive was successful, and the team became the first to see the remainders of what was once the greatest ship in the world. Ballard returned from the expedition a changed man. He had a newfound respect for the Titanic and all the lives lost on that fateful night. Although his team had closely observed the wreck and took many new photographs, that was all they took. They left any and all artifacts completely untouched, in the belief that the wreck was a somber gravesite and should be treated as such. They left taking only photos and leaving behind a small plaque,
in memory of those souls who perished with the Titanic.
Charles Pellegrino, friend of Ballard and fellow oceanographer, summed up these thoughts.
The Titanic. So many stories were told by survivors, told and retold until they became part of our culture. A symbol for tragedy, blind arrogance, heroism, cowardice, irony, so many things. Maybe you don't want to touch a symbol too intimately. In the very least, you don't want to tread on it.
These sentiments were echoed by the United States Congress, who declared the wreck site an international memorial in 1996 to
discourage most treasure seekers.
However, Ballard did not pursue any more legal action in relation to the Titanic, and this decision would soon spark a debate that would last until today. Not long after Robert Ballard released the location of the Titanic wreck, Titanic Ventures Limited Partnership, accompanied by Ifremer Technology, dove on the site and excavated over 800 items. Plates and dishes, paper documents, luggage, an empty safe, and a cherub statue from the grand staircase were all plucked from the depths of the ocean floor. Together, these artifacts were valued at over $100 million. They were separated, though. Some on tour around the U.S. for visitors to see, others showcased in various museum exhibits, such as the National Maritime Museum, others on TV specials, and the rest for sale to collectors. Many were outraged by this turn of events, as it violated the sanctity of the gravesite and contradicted Ballard's wishes. Exactly what he had tried to avoid, artifacts became showpieces and material objects, cheapening them. Titanic Ventures defended their decision to salvage artifacts and exhibit them, arguing that people had the right to see them for their historical value. Dick Barton, once the vice president of the company, explained that they wanted
to document, record, and share the special wreck with the world, and not just the few fortunate and privileged enough to get down there.
Regardless of the protest, the salvage was completely legal, for Ballard was not the owner of the wreck site. According to international maritime law, the discoverer of a wreck can only stake a claim if he raises objects from the site. Otherwise, ownership of a sunken ship is determined by the first to salvage artifacts. The Titanic's ownership is especially difficult to determine because its original owner, White Star, has long disappeared. White Star was eventually sold to the Cunard Line after the sinking, and even then, the Titanic, which was considered unrecoverable, was not part of the sale. Legally, Titanic Ventures Limited Partnership, now RMS Titanic Inc., or RMST, has become the owner, being the first to recover artifacts. Despite this, other companies also wanted rights to Titanic. Court cases were necessary, and RMST went into trial in RMS Titanic Inc. versus the wrecked and abandoned vessel. It was given a right to Titanic, though appeals were made by such companies as Merrick's Titanic, who had also mounted their own expedition. Eventually, in the summer of 1994, RMST was designated salvor in possession by an American court, the term granting it sole right to salvage Titanic, though it does not own the ship itself or the salvaged items. It only has a right to put on touring display the 5,900 items, but nothing more. Those against RMST argue that it should have respected Ballard's wishes and left the wreck as a memorial site. Merrick's Titanic argued in court that RMST had not gone back to the site for years after its initial dive, thus abandoning it. Another U.S. court argued that it did not have a right to the items because
a free finders keepers policy is but a short step from active piracy and pillaging,
meaning that RMST's taking of the artifacts is the same as stealing from their rightful owners. Nevertheless, RMST is salvor in possession to this day, though it continues to rally for more complete ownership. Though Dr. Ballard wished the Titanic would be left unmolested, it was not. Teams that visited the wreck site may have damaged it, but some did not. Their expeditions led to many successes. IMAX ventured to the great depths of the Titanic to take nothing but video footage, respecting Ballard's wishes. Footage from IMAX was used to create a video to give the viewer the impression that they were exploring for themselves. Additionally, the last team to visit the Titanic was a group of scientists studying deep-sea life and environmental processes. 24 different species of living organisms were discovered at the wreck. More expeditions of the Titanic also proved to be great technological breakthroughs. New fiber optic cables were used to depict colorful images, as opposed to the old copper cables that produced only black and white images. New submersibles, Mir 1 and Mir 2, which had a capacity of 3 people, were used to make 17 successful dives. And ultimately, debates surrounding the ownership of the RMS Titanic were partly successful because they did decide the possession of the artifacts. Though debating the ownership of artifacts was successful, the debate surrounding the ownership of the ship itself was a failure. RMST was not proven the complete owner of the Titanic. There are still court cases pending, and there are many appeals to the original verdict. A lack of honest legal action failed to protect the Titanic. The expedition by RMST in 1986 did not treat the wreck as a true archaeological site. There is no documentation on the location of any artifacts. iFremer drove on the site with their sub-nautile, damaging the wreck and taking many artifacts. A show called Return to the Titanic Live, hosted by Telly Savalas, hosted a chest from the debris field and opened it. Inside were undocumented coins, jewelry, and currency. The show contradicted Ballard's exact hopes that the Titanic not be exploited. There are many consequences of salvaging the Titanic. A personal consequence for Robert Ballard was that he greatly regretted not pursuing legal action in the ownership initially. Though he still does not wish to salvage artifacts, he states that,
had we followed this legal route in 1985, we might well have been able to prevent the high seas carnival that has unfolded at the wreck since then.
Because the gravesite was disturbed, survivors of the Titanic and their families were severely affected. Eva Hart, a survivor, has spoken out against the excavation, stating,
they should leave her down there undisturbed on the bottom, not just as my father's gravesite, but as a monument to all the strangeness and arrogance of the human animal.
Edward Kamuta of the Titanic Historical Society also talked about the effects on Titanic survivors.
One of those people was a man named Frank Goldsmith, who was 9 years old when he survived. His father perished on the ship, so Frank had his ashes scattered on the site.
These people's final resting place has been violated and maybe even destroyed as a consequence of the salvages. The salvaging also affected the ship itself. Titanic has been severely damaged because of the many different groups that have explored it. In 1987, RMST caused permanent damage in their eagerness to bring back artifacts. A good portion of the forward deck collapsed, as well as the crow's nest and the forward mast and the bridge. One team destroyed the crow's nest as they attempted to pull it from the mast. There were also reports of Russian submarines colliding with the hull. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration estimates that the wreck will likely collapse within the next 50 years. The scientific evidence points to a more gradual, predictable breakdown than a catastrophic structural failure. RMST views it as their responsibility to recover artifacts before the ship is completely gone. As Barton of RMST says,
we estimate that the wreck, the bow section at least, will implode and be destroyed.
However, because the court has only allowed RMST salvor and possession rights, it has gone back to court numerous more times in attempts to gain better ownership and compensation for huge salvage costs. There is no real end to this debate in sight. For the foreseeable future, there will be court cases because the issue of true and complete ownership is too big, and RMS Titanic Inc.'s salvage rights cannot be touched. There may never be an answer to the moral question of whether excavating a gravesite was right to begin with. People will continue to wonder, and the debate will live on as the story lives on. In our hearts and in our minds will forever be the RMS Titanic at the bottom of the sea.